Okay, it is recording, and I'm going to start the webinar or let people in.
Should I get started, Ellie, or do you think I should wait a couple more minutes?
I think you're good to go. We've got 23 people have joined us already. I
Great.
turned the chat on so people can ask questions. I think we're good to go.
Sounds good. I'll go ahead. Excuse me. Hi, I'm Joe Coleman with the Loudon Wildlife Conservancy, and I'd like to thank you all for joining us today. Before I introduce our speaker, I do want to thank the Loudoun County Public Library for co-hosting this program with Loudoun Wildlife, and also tell you a little bit about Loudoun Wildlife Conservancy. First, the library is an incredible resource for information, for books, and for much, much more, including these programs. If you visit its website, you'll get an idea just by seeing how much they do, and drill into their event calendar for just one day, and I think you'll be absolutely blown away by the wide choice of possibilities that they offer. Um, the Loudoun Wildlife Conservancy's mission is to preserve, protect, and restore wildlife habitat through community engagement. And that's a pretty tough mission, especially in Loudoun County. The reason we do this is the greatest threat to wildlife worldwide is the loss of habitat. We believe that wildlife and the natural world enhances and enriches our quality of life, and that we have a responsibility to ensure that wildlife continues to thrive. We work in four different areas: education, scientific monitoring, habitat restoration, and conservation advocacy. While we have some paid staff, we are mostly a volunteer driven, and almost everything we offer, most of which is free, is managed by volunteers. We do education, as I mentioned. Besides programs like this one and a number of different kinds of field trips that we hold throughout the county, we have a quarterly newsletter and a highly informative website. Uh, we also do scientific monitoring. We believe everything we do should be based on sound science. Because of that, we have organized and or participate in several scientific programs. And just as an aside, we use eBird constantly, the topic that Allie will be talking about tonight. Habitat restoration. We work with our partners to protect and restore habitats throughout the county. We ourselves own, protect, and steward the J.K. Black Oak Wildlife Sanctuary, which is an 87-acre parcel in the Luckett's area that contains a globally rare wetlands and is home to numerous amphibians, two kinds of fairy shrimp, and a great deal of other wildlife. And not least, we participate in doing conservation advocacy. We encourage our local government and our local businesses to practice and implement policies that protect, benefit, and enhance wildlife habitat. We were the lead organization in the establishment of the Banshee Rigs Nature Preserve 25 years ago. One of our part-time employees is a conservation advocate who works with local government and our volunteers to protect the county's remaining natural resources. If you aren't already a member, please become one and help us protect and preserve wildlife in Loudoun County. If you want to know more about us first, please do visit our website. It is a wealth of information. Tonight, Allie Smith, a project manager for Merlin at the Cornell Lab of Ornithology, will tell us about eBird, an incredible resource for birders, which is used by almost 1 million people worldwide. Allie connects people to the Cornell Lab's Merlin Bird Eye by doing talks, webinars like this one, and other outreach activities. Allie, would you please tell us why eBird is such a useful tool?
I would love to. Yeah, thank you all so much for having me today. Yeah, I'm very excited to talk to you all about eBird, which is the largest bird citizen science project in the world. And all of the eBirders that I've met throughout my time here, all have their own story of how they came to eBird and to birding in general. And to sort of start this off, I wanted to share my story of how I came to eBird, and how I came to be working here at the Cornell Lab of Ornithology. So yeah, I am not in Virginia with all of you. I am up in Ithaca, New York, in the physical Cornell Lab of Ornithology building today. So I'm going to share my screen and we'll begin. Yeah, so to start off, birds are wonderful. That's why we're all here. And seabirds and shorebirds are really my one true love. I totally fell in love with red knots specifically, the best shorebird ever, on a middle school field trip to Cape May when I was in school, and I was totally hooked instantly. And that led me to get a degree in wildlife ecology, get really passionate about endangered species conservation, and then over the last 8 years or so since I've graduated, I've had the privilege to work with different species of threatened and endangered seabirds, like this Atlantic puffin here up in Maine, and endangered black skimmers in Florida, and with burrowing owls also in Florida. And all of these birds are threatened in some way. And I was so happy to be helping them as a biologist studying them. But throughout all of these different jobs that I've had at these different places that I've worked, and especially working with these owls that are living in the middle of cities, I realized that birds, more so than anything, need the support of people who love them. And we can do all the science in the world that we want, but we need the support of millions and millions of people who are willing to make changes in their lives or vote or do things to protect habitat and help birds. If we don't have the support of people, all the science that we're doing is meaningless, if we can't put that into action. And I've also found that I really like working with people. And all of this is sort of what's led me to work for the Cornell Lab of Ornithology, where most of our work is focused on citizen science, where we're engaging millions of people around the world who use eBird and Merlin to learn about the birds around them and then share those sightings with us. And with all of that data that people like all of you watching here today, like all that data that you collect, we're able to do some really amazing things to help birds. And that's what I want to talk about today. A lot of birders find eBird for the first time because they like making lists. This is one of my favorite like bird person things. Everyone sort of has their own list tucked away in notebooks like this in different parts of their houses. And I'm sure that resonates with a lot of you here. Keeping lists is something that just seems to come really naturally to a lot of birders. And this list here that I have up on the screen is an example of a field notebook from the 1920s, where the author of this list recorded which species they saw, whether they were in a hedge or a canal or in the woods, in a field. And I'm sure a lot of you, myself included, have lists pretty similar to this, stashed away in notebooks on your bookshelf at home. And over time, the person who made this list probably gained a really deep understanding of the birds in their specific area, right around their house, right in their own neighborhood. They were an expert in that one place. And they might have noted things like, maybe they could find blackbirds year round, but that they only saw the sand martins that are listed here only in the summer. And this sort of like expertise of, you are an expert of your own sightings is sort of that idea behind eBird, that every single one of you watching right now, and every birder in the world has a unique knowledge of the places that they go birding. And how incredible would it be if we could gather all of that knowledge up in one place and share it with others? And all of this sort of begins with a checklist. And an eBird checklist is a little bit different than that notebook that I just showed you. So that notebook page looked a little bit more like a list of all of the birds that that person had seen in in their life maybe, or around their house. But an eBird checklist is a very specific thing. It's a list of the number of species that you saw in one place at one time. And to demonstrate what a checklist looks like, if you haven't used eBird before, let's pretend to go birding together right now. So let's all pretend to take a trip right now to the coast of Georgia, to a place near and dear to my heart, to Jekyll Island. So we'll say it's a beautiful day. There are some nice tall sand dunes around. It's low tide. You can see some mud flats exposed. There's some tasty worms and snails out there. You can already see a lot of birds in the distance. It's going to be a great day. But before we jump out there, we're going to open up our eBird app. We're going to take out our phone, open up eBird, and start a checklist. Hit that big button at the bottom, and then start walking. And we can walk along the beach, and we start to notice some birds around us. Here's our first bird of the day, beautiful ruddy turnstone. And we can open up our eBird app and note that we saw this bird by just adding it to our checklist right here. Now it's recorded. We can keep walking, find some more shorebirds. These look like a bunch of dunlin. We can count them. Counting them is very important. Just noting what species is around is helpful, but getting an accurate count of the birds that are around you really helps us estimate abundance and then trends over time. So we counted 16 dunlin. We can add that to our list and move on. And then as we're walking, maybe behind the dunes, there's a bunch of trees. There's a little scrubby area with some bushes and grasses, and we hear a noise that sounds sort of like this. Maybe a familiar sound for a lot of you watching too. We know this is a house wren that's singing. And even though we can't see it, we know that it's a house wren. And we know that there's at least one. So we can add one house wren to our checklist and we can move on. Maybe add some more later on if we think we hear other individuals. And we keep walking and we keep birding and we find some other birds to add to the list, like our piping plover, maybe some gulls mixed in with a big flock of terns, maybe another big flock of semi-palmated plovers. And while we're busy kind of sifting through these plovers, trying to pick out anything different, we look out over the water briefly and we see this going by. We just see this big flock of ducks. And maybe you pull out your binoculars to try to identify them. And you kind of get an estimate really fast, but they're really far away. And this is the best look that you've got. And we're pretty confident that these are scoters, just based on our knowledge of the ducks in the area. They're all black, they're pretty big, and at this time of year, that's an expected bird to be around. But there's 3 species of scoters, and we didn't really get a good look at this one. Maybe we think they're black scoters because they're just generally the most common and most abundant in this place at this time. But we think there could have been some white-winged scoters mixed in. Maybe there was a surf scoter. We're not really sure. We're not 100% sure. We don't want to make something up if we're not totally confident. And that's totally okay. Like sometimes birds just look really similar. Sometimes you get a terrible look like this. And it's totally fine to leave them unidentified. But we do want to note that we did see them. And the best way to do that in eBird is to identify them to the best of our abilities. And in this case, we just know they're scoters. And we estimated about 300 in this big long flock that was flying by. So we can enter them in the eBird app or on the website as 300 scoter spa, just scoter species. And that's great. And we move on. And we're just about wrapped up with our birding. And before we finish our checklist, we see this really goofy looking bird out in the distance. And we pull our spotting scope out and study the bird. And we get a picture of it through the spotting scope with our cell phone. And it's not a great picture. This is not art by any means, but it is identifiable. And we can tell that it's a long-billed curlew. And we've got a picture of it, which is amazing. So we can add it to our eBird checklist. And we notice that it got flagged here. It's highlighted in yellow. It's got a little orange R next to it. And that's telling us that this observation, this curlew, is an unusual observation for this area that we're in at this time of the year. So we need to add a little bit more information to support the sighting. So in the app, we just enter a couple comments, just describing what we saw and comparing it to other maybe more common species that we could confuse it with. And then we also remember that we really want to submit this photo as documentation when we get back home. And with that last sighting, we're done birding. We're done for the day. We've walked down the beach. We've counted every bird that we could find, had a great day. And we can review our list to make sure we didn't forget to add anything. We hit stop at the bottom. And then before we hit submit, there's a couple other things on this screen that we need to answer. So at the top, it asks how many observers you were birding with. So in this case, I was birding with a friend. So there are 2 observers for this checklist. The app keeps track of time and distance for you. So that time looks good. It says I walked 1.2 miles. It keeps a track of where you walked, which is not visible to the public, but is visible to scientists behind the scenes who use this information. And that track looks just like this. You can view your own tracks on the eBird website. It's really cool to see where you go birding. So in this case, we'll say we started out in the soccer field near the parking lot, walked out to the beach, and then backtracked a little bit for a total of 1.2 miles. So that is looking good. And then the very last thing we need to do is answer this question that's right in the middle of the screen, and answer it honestly. So is this a complete checklist of the birds that you were able to identify? And in this case, yes, we did note every bird that we were able to identify. We didn't intentionally ignore or skip over the gulls because we don't like gulls and they were mixed in with the terns. We made sure to add the gulls to the list. We counted the scoters that were flying by. Even though we didn't get them down to species, we still made sure that they were represented on this checklist. We didn't intentionally leave anything off. You would answer no if you maybe, for example, went out and only recorded the plovers and the curlew because you thought they were cool birds, even though you know there were other birds. That would not be a complete checklist. But in our case, we did count everything. So we can say, yes, this is a complete checklist, and then we submit it. And then that checklist that we just created while we were out on our birding trip gets added to our database behind the scenes and to our account on ebird.org. And when we submit that photo later on, it shows up in the checklist right here on the screen. And it looks just like this. If you were to go online, you could probably find this checklist of mine from 2 years ago and see all this. So this was one checklist of birds that were present in one location at one time, represented by this tiny little yellow dot on the map here on the screen that the arrow is pointing at. And this is just a snapshot of what the bird community of Jekyll Island looked like at this one moment in time. And that's awesome. That's like my one effort for the day. And with a million eBirders around the world going out and birding and submitting data like this, we can start to build a bigger picture of bird distributions around the world throughout the whole year. But this is one of my favorite images that the science team shares with us. Every couple months they update this. This is a map of where each point of light that you see on this map is one of the 98 million checklists that have been submitted to eBird. So across the whole world. So there aren't like country or map boundaries on this at all. This is just purely points put on a globe. And you can really start to see like where people are birding here. I love you can see the shipping channels throughout the oceans where boats are passing through, where people have been birding while they're on boats. And you can also see that there's a lot of gaps in this data here. We have plenty of representation of birds from the United States, Europe, Australia, a lot of South America, but a lot of parts of the world where we just don't have a lot of data yet. So a lot of incredible data already collected, but still plenty of room to grow. And our data looks like this so far. Looking at the numbers, this is what we've got. We just hit 1 million eBirders around the world, which is incredible that first of all, that there are a million people in the world that love birds enough to contribute their data. But in total, those 1 million eBirders have submitted 2 billion observations of birds in the form of almost 100 million checklists, representing almost every single species of bird that's possible to find in the world. There's somewhere, we think, around 11,000 species, so still a couple hundred or so maybe that aren't represented in eBird yet. If anyone wants to go find some very rare birds, we would love your data. And then those 1 million eBirders have also submitted 65 million photos and 2.5 million sound recordings, which are another incredible and valuable scientific resource that I could talk about for another hour that I won't touch too much on today. But those photos and sounds are what enable us to build tools like Merlin. So very grateful for all those photos and sounds that you're all submitting to us. This is a ton of information that we can use for bird conservation. Just looking specifically at Virginia, you have an amazing community of eBirders. You've got 46,000 of you in the state who are submitting data and to help birds. There's almost 2 million checklists have been submitted from the state of Virginia for a total of almost 500 species. And another thing I'd like to note is whenever possible, we work directly with local conservation organizations to make sure that eBird data is being used to help birds in local communities. And within Virginia, we work very closely with these 5 organizations who have all gotten together to manage data quality and also make sure that the data being collected in your state is actually being used for conservation. So this is pretty exciting. So I want to show you some examples of ways that all of this data, these 2 billion observations, some of the ways that these are being used to help birds and help us understand them. So I want to use our friend here, the great blue heron, as an example. I'm sure this is a familiar bird to most people watching. So if you wanted to learn more about the great blue heron, any of you right now could go online to ebird.org and search for the species. And the first thing you get if you just search for this is this really wacky looking purple map that shows where in the world people are reporting seeing great blue herons. The intensity of the purple here just represents the frequency that the species is reported in checklists, with darker meaning more frequently observed. So you can see like Florida is very dark purple, which means a lot of people are reporting herons in that area. Maybe, the Rocky Mountains, there are great blue herons around, but there are fewer of them being reported than in Florida and on the coast, maybe. And if you zoom in really closely, you can see exact points on a map where people have reported seeing great blue herons. So this is a little bit chaotic looking, but in Virginia, specifically in Virginia, eBirders have reported great blue herons 290,000 times, which is amazing. And you as a random person out in the world, you as a birder can go online and go look at those 290,000 great blue heron observations on this map, which is a really useful tool if you're planning a trip or if you want to figure out where to go to see a specific bird. Like if you wanted to go see great blue herons, you could zoom into where you live, right, like this, and all of those orange points are where people have reported a great blue heron within the last 30 days. So this is super helpful for trip planning, but this alone isn't super helpful for researchers. We need to do a little bit more work to really learn about great blue herons from these data. So to take this one step further, our team in the Cornell Lab of Ornithology's Center for Avian Population Studies takes all of those checklists and uses those data to model abundance for each species. So this is sort of the same map that I just showed you, but this is representing abundance of great blue herons, where red on the map is where herons are found only in the breeding season, purple is where they're found year-round, and blue is where they're found only in the winter because they are a migratory species. And looking at the map, this does make a little bit more sense. You can see there's apparently a ton of herons living in Florida, along the Mississippi River, along the coast, and very few herons relatively living in the Rocky Mountains and, in the desert. And another fun thing that they're able to do is create these abundance maps for each week of the year. We have enough data for great blue herons that we're able to produce these really, really detailed maps throughout the entire year, 52 different maps. And when you put these 52 maps together, you get this really fun animation that shows the movements of great blue herons throughout the year. So this is the summer where they're all up north breeding, and then starting to migrate right about now down to their wintering grounds, and then back up. And maps like this are available for almost every single North American bird and increasingly more for birds from the rest of the world. Basically, whenever we feel we have enough data to make an accurate map, we're able to produce these with more maps like this added every November. Very excited for this upcoming November, adding a whole bunch more species soon. And then when we have even more data, we have enough, especially data over time, we're able to produce these maps, which is a much newer project. So this has really been a major focus of the Center for Avian Population Studies over the last couple of years. This is something we're really excited about. Now that eBird has existed really since 2007, we now have enough data to show how each species abundance is changing over time. So we're able to tell we have enough eBird data to figure out, like, over the last 15 years, basically, has this species declined or increased in population? And on this map here, this is not a happy map. This map here is showing all of that red means that abundance of great blue herons in that area is decreasing, and blue means it's increasing. So for the great blue heron, this is a pretty dramatic decline that we can see along the Mississippi River and really across most of the Great Blue Heron's range. And maps like this can be often pretty heartbreaking, especially for a bird that just feels as common as the Great Blue Heron to, look at this and see that over time, especially in the Mississippi River Valley, that Great Blue Herons have declined by almost 30% over the last 15 years. That's kind of horrifying. But it's also exciting that we have maps like this because they're really useful. This is the first time that we're able to very quickly see on a range-wide scale of a species exactly where species are in trouble, which can help us much better target conservation efforts. So if, for example, we're interested in working on Great Blue Heron conservation, you wanted to help herons specifically, you could look at this map and see that you might want to focus your attention on the Mississippi River area if you want to have the biggest impact on herons. Looking a little bit more specifically, here's a happier map that I wanted to show you because they're not all sad. But we can dig down to state level data for each species. So one example here, looking out west, we can see that the greater sage grouse is their abundance is increasing in Montana, but is still decreasing in Wyoming. So this is a really useful tool for land managers out in the Western United States who can see whatever land management practices are working in Montana are working really well for the sage grouse, and maybe Wyoming could talk to Montana and help out the sage grouse down there. So it's really been useful for especially our partners to be able to get this type of feedback and figure out how well their management practices are working over time. I want to see if I can show you an example specific to Virginia, because it's always nice to have an example a little bit closer to home. So if you can, I'm going to share my screen one more time. If you go online right now, you can go to ebird.org and up to this science tab right at the top. I'm going to zoom in a little bit more. And you can explore all of these maps on your own. So I wanted to show you the map for the eastern bluebird and all the things that we've been able to do with the data for eastern bluebird that you've all collected. So here is our abundance map for eastern bluebirds. You can see they're very abundant in the southeastern United States, a little bit less abundant up north where they do still breed. And we can look at specifically the state of Virginia if we're interested. So I'm selecting United States, scrolling down here to Virginia. And this is pretty cool. This is telling me that of the population modeled on this map right here, which in this case for the eastern bluebird really is effectively the entire eastern bluebird species. So this is telling me that 5% of all eastern bluebirds live in Virginia and that they can be found throughout 98% of your state. And we've also got a very exciting migration map showing the movements of eastern bluebirds throughout the year, which is just sort of fun to look at. And then something that I thought was really exciting that I wanted to show you. Here we go. So here's bluebirds in the winter. Something that I thought was really exciting was this trends map. And the overall picture is really interesting. This is showing me that eastern bluebirds are generally increasing in abundance on the East Coast and decreasing in abundance in the Midwest. And then if you look even more specifically at just the United States, overall, eastern bluebirds have declined by about 23% over a 10-year period from 2012 to 2022. But if we look at Virginia specifically, whatever is happening in Virginia is going very, very well. Whatever you do in there is going great. The abundance of eastern bluebirds has increased by almost 15% in Virginia over the last 10 years. And you can see that specifically, especially in the eastern part of the state here. All this blue here is good. That means eastern bluebird populations are increasing pretty dramatically here. So nice work. I did see quite a few bluebird boxes when I was down there. That was really cool to see. But this is like, what an amazing way to get feedback on the efforts that you're all putting in down there. So this is really exciting of a happy map for Virginia here. So there are a bunch of other fun tools online, still on that status and trends portion of ebird.org. If you'd like to go on and play with that at any point, it's always available. You can get really, really specific with looking at exactly an area that you want. So you could, as an example here, so this is looking at the abundance data for Connecticut warblers, cute little bird. And right here, we've drawn a box around the Chicago area, this little green polygon, just sort of just circling the Chicago area. And this little graph that's also up on the screen is showing these spikes right around May and June, and then right again around September. And this graph is telling me that during spring and fall migration, half of the entire population of all Connecticut warblers that exist in the world pass through Chicago. And I don't know why they do that. I'm not sure what is going on in the world of Connecticut warblers, but half of all the Connecticut warblers that exist go through Chicago in these 2 weeks of the year. So this is really important because Chicago is a really important area for this species. And that's important for us to know because one of the biggest dangers on birds to birds on migration is light pollution. And by knowing that half of an entire species is passing through one of the biggest cities in the United States, that's really great motivation for us to do some advocacy to try to get more and more people in this area to turn off their lights at night so that birds don't get distracted by light pollution and that fewer birds, hopefully, with that type of advocacy, fewer birds hitting windows and dying. So this is just one way of sort of looking at that data. But this tool, this like polygon tool, is available for use really anywhere in the United States for any species. So you could go on, draw a box sort of around the area that you live in, and kind of look through different species and see you might find some exciting things like this. Oh, all those tools that I showed are available on our website. If any of you have questions, please let me know. And those are the really polished data products that we've made available to the public. But we also work really closely with other organizations around the world to make more specific tools for different projects that they're working on. One pretty new project that was just made earlier this year are these shared stewardship maps that show for a single state in the United States where species that breed in that state are most concentrated during the winter. So as an example here, this map here is for the state of Michigan. And this is showing that the birds that breed in Michigan are concentrated in the southern United States during the winter, especially Louisiana and Mexico. And these maps, like this one here, are being used by a group of 41 different state wildlife agencies from different countries, some from the United States, some from Central and South America, who are all working together to protect the birds that they share. And my friend who works upstairs, almost right directly above me right now, actually, he is an ecologist and he specializes in data science, and he's the one that makes these maps. And I asked him if he could make one of these maps for me for Virginia, because he hadn't made one yet for that state. And he made it and sent it to me and was so excited. I got like the happiest email from him. He was just so excited about this because he thought Virginia's map was really cool. And it's because it looks like this. So this map here is showing that your birds that breed in Virginia are concentrated in the winter, specifically in Florida, in Mexico, and the Amazon rainforest. So this is where your birds that are right now are migrating to spend the winter. And this alone is a beautiful map. This is just really cool to know that, you could go down to Florida and see your birds that live in Virginia in the summer. But my friend is really excited because he also tested out this more experimental, more detailed type of map that he gave me permission to share with you all that shows uniqueness of shared stewardship, meaning that these are the areas of the world that are uniquely connected to Virginia specifically. And you can see, so the thing that he was really excited about was the Amazon rainforest is just totally glowing. And if you zoom in even closer, you can see that the birds that breed in Virginia are really closely tied with the Amazon River itself. Like the river is just really lighting up. It's bright purple on the map there. It's really dark. And that means that there's a high concentration of Virginia's birds that spend the winter along the river itself. So if you want to help Virginia's birds, and you're already doing a great job with the Loudon Wildlife Conservancy protecting breeding habitat, but they're only in Virginia for half the year. So another great way to help Virginia's birds would be to protect the Amazon River itself. Another project that I wanted to share that we're working on is with working directly with the coffee industry. So the coffee that you drink in the morning comes almost entirely from the yellow regions on this map here. And those other maps that I showed you that showed a lot of Virginia's birds spend the winter in these yellow areas where coffee is produced. A lot of birds like yellow warblers and Cooper's hawks and tanagers, warblers, orioles, and indigo buntings. These birds spend a lot of their time in the winter on coffee farms. And coffee is grown in two different ways. Sun-grown coffee is an example photo right up here on the screen. The photo on the left here is where an area of forest is clear cut and then replaced with coffee plants. And then shade-grown coffee, this other photo on the right, is where coffee is planted in the understory of native forests, where there is still a canopy overhead. And just by looking at the two, you can tell that shade-grown coffee has a much more diverse forest. There are tall trees and lower plants, and these two different regions of the forest's canopy and understory support different bird communities. But the sun-grown coffee doesn't really have that overstory. It's much less diverse in structure, so it doesn't support nearly as much of a diversity of birds. And in Costa Rica, we're working with partners to use eBird data to identify regions that both support high biodiversity and are also resilient to climate change, knowing that climate change is our reality now and that it's affecting both birds and also the coffee industry. So one of our partners there is called eCafe, which is the Coffee Institute of Costa Rica. We're working with them to try to prioritize area to focus conservation efforts using eBird data and climate science. And in these priority areas that we've identified using this eBird data, they're working with farmers to encourage sustainable practices and plant native trees to turn those sun coffee farms into shade-grown coffee farms. So this is, oh, I don't think the sound is working on this, but pretend you're hearing a beautiful dawn chorus of birds right now. But this is what one of these converted coffee plantations looks like. You can see there are rows of crops that used to be sun-grown coffee and that are now, with the addition of planted trees, has turned into a shade-grown coffee plantation that is so much more biodiverse and supports many more birds, including the birds of Virginia that have flown down for the winter. So another great way to help birds is next time you're at the grocery store to just take a look at your coffee and check and see if it's shade grown. I have one more example that I want to share. We could go all day. We just reached 900 different scientific publications that have been published using eBird data. And if any of you are curious, we have a list of all of those published on our website if you want to get really deep into that. And they're all incredible uses of it. But one example that I wanted to share with you all is totally unrelated to coffee. It is an example about the Federal Bald and Golden Eagle Protection Act, which impacts the permitting process for installing wind turbines. So if you want to install a wind turbine in an area where there are a lot of eagles, it's understandably much more difficult to get a permit for that, to the point where your permit is likely to be denied because we don't want to hurt eagles, and there's a federal law that protects them. But how do you know if there are a lot of eagles in your area? And to answer that question of where are the eagles, up until very recently, the way that the Federal Fish and Wildlife Service figured out where the eagles was just by flying planes across hundreds of transects in different management areas in the Western United States, and by having a pilot flying and a biologist just counting eagles from the plane as they flew over these transects. And then they would extrapolate those numbers across the whole management area, which these are the 4 management areas out west that I'm going to be talking about. Just extrapolating those small transects to this entire area. And that leaves them with a map like this, where you have a relative density of eagles for each management area of the Western United States. And these are the numbers that were used to inform where wind turbines should and should not be placed. And you can imagine that it works a little bit, but it doesn't work super well because this is a massive area. This is like half the United States. And areas this large aren't consistent across the landscape. There are a lot of different habitats within each of these management regions. And eagles aren't evenly distributed across this landscape either. And this map is a great start, but isn't really capturing that detail. We at the Cornell Lab of Ornithology in eBird had enough eagle data from eBird that we felt that we could probably do a pretty good job modeling this population at a much finer scale. And we did that. But first, before that this much more finer scale data could be used to inform the permitting process, we needed to prove to Fish and Wildlife Service that our numbers were accurate. We don't want to overestimate or underestimate eagle abundance in any area. We want to make sure that it matches up with their surveys. So long story short, our scientists here at the Cornell lab use eBird data and habitat data to model eagle populations within each of those areas, and then compared it to those historic aerial surveys that have been done over the last couple decades. And it matches up really well. So this graph is showing us the black dots are the numbers from Fish and Wildlife surveys with error bars, those spikes up and down from each point. And the green is our estimate based on data from eBird. And you can see this matches up like pretty perfectly. So now that we know our model matches up really well with actual survey numbers that were taken from planes, we can use that model to estimate eagle populations on a way finer scale and get a much more accurate and much more useful map. So if you were thinking of installing, well, here's the much more accurate map. So if we look at, for an example, area 17, for example, you wanted to put a turbine somewhere in this area. The eastern edge is looking pretty great because this map is telling me that there really aren't a lot of eagles along the eastern edge of area 17 here. But the western edge is very abundant there are a lot of eagles on that western side. So maybe that wouldn't be the best place to put a wind turbine. But really anywhere on this map, yellow is telling us that there are a lot of eagles, and gray is telling us that there are little to no eagles. So this map now is the map that is being used to help inform where wind turbines are able to be placed in the Western United States. And this is great because green energy is awesome. We love wind energy. And we also love eagles. And this is a way that sort of everybody wins, thanks to people like you, thanks to birders who are out all around the world, who are going birding, submitting their data, submitting photos, submitting sounds, really all helping us to make the world a better place for birds. So with that, that is all I've got for tonight. So a huge thank you to all of you who have ever submitted eBird data. If you haven't ever submitted eBird data but are interested in getting started, online we have a free eBird Essentials course that it's about a half-hour long, totally free, and just walks you through everything you need to know about eBird. And I can put a link to that in the chat. But I think we've got time for questions. I need to
We
look through the
certainly
chat.
do. We've gotten some good, interesting questions too. Um, you know, one of them was asking how they weren't sure how you could actually see the number of observations that were occurring when you were showing us the screens. The graph said there were a lot, but you mentioned at one point the number of great blue herons. And is that data that's actually available through that?
Yes, so on the status and trends maps, we don't give like exact numbers of great blue herons that exist in the state of Virginia, for example. We are able to just show how much that abundance has changed over time as a percentage. So I can't tell you have 300,000 herons in the state, but we can tell you that bluebirds have increased by 15%.
Okay. No, there was also the question, and this is a technical question. Entering birds' photos with eBird entry is certainly it's not possible with the mobile app, right? It's something you do
Yes.
have to do when you get back home on a computer. And it is pretty obvious then to take
Yes.
care of.
Yes, so if you want to submit a photo to an eBird checklist, here, let me see if we can do that as an example. Yes, so that's something you'd have to do when you get back home. I do it for my phone all the time. You can open up your checklist on your phone on the website. And then that's how I submit like my bad digiscoped photos. And when I take a picture through my spotting scope with my cell phone, I just do it all on my phone. But if you have nicer photos, and you edit those on a computer, you can log into your account on ebird.org and open up the checklist that you made. And there's a big button at the top to submit photos to that checklist.
Okay. Good to know. Thank you. And looking at the chat box, somebody asked if you do any work with Melissa Grew, but anyway.
We do. I don't specifically work with her, but our Bird Academy team upstairs does. She worked with us on a bird photography course, which is also available online. I've heard it's very good.
That's great. We also had someone ask, it's obvious that a tremendous number of people, million, are using eBird throughout the world. Are there countries where eBird is not yet being adopted for any good reason you can think of?
Yes, certainly. We're not the only bird citizen science project, and a lot of other countries have their own versions, sort of their own versions of eBird. And whenever possible, we always try to work together. So right now we've been working with BirdLife South Africa as one example, to try to integrate eBird more into their community. They have their own method of collecting bird data, with a different protocol than one that we use for eBird. So we've been working with them to try to make those two protocols match up a little bit better, really so that we can share data, because we want to give them as much of our eBird data as possible so that they can do work in South Africa to help their own birds. And then we would like their data too, because then we can make even better abundance and status and trends maps as well. So that is a huge, that's a big project of, I don't, how many hundreds of countries there are around the world, working with different bird conservation organizations, but it's a lot of fun.
Um, there was one question, and I thought, can the new Virginia maps with connectivity be shared? Are they on the website yet? The ones you showed us and other things?
Those, I actually don't know if they're on the website, but let me check in. I believe, yes, I can send those to you as an image with a little description of what those are if you want to share it with.
I was personally really fascinated with the one on bluebirds because I'm the compiler for the Central Loudoun Christmas bird count. And in the last 5 or 6 years, twice the Central Loudoun count had the highest count of bluebirds in the entire country on
That's
a
a
Christmas bird count. And I thought that that was thanks to our incredible bluebird box project that the Loudoun Wildlife runs. And it was really nice to see that particular map, um, and to have that out there.
Yeah,
And at this point, did you have something to add? I'm sorry.
oh no, I just put in the chat, I just put a link to the status and trends map for the Eastern bluebird.
Great.
You can zoom in and see, that Virginia has increased by 15%. And those connectivity maps that I showed, I can send those as an image. I can email that to you and you can share that with everybody.
And a question came in just now, and I think it's a good one. Um, Can you tell us what Cornell is doing to expand Merlin and eBird to other places outside of the country, um, to make it an even more effective tool worldwide?
Yes, yeah, that's part of my job. That's what I get to do all day, which is so fun. Um, yeah, so right now, Merlin Bird ID free app for your phone. I'm sure most of you probably already have it. It works as a field guide to every country in the world. So you can download like a bird pack for wherever you're going to go, and then you basically have a field guide. Just as you might have like, my Sibley guides that are up behind me right here. Um, so you can use it as a field guide with photos and sounds, but those identification features, that sound ID specifically, doesn't work everywhere in the world yet. You can go outside and turn on Merlin and it'll like start to listen to the world around you and identify what it's hearing. That works really well on 1,384 species right now. Uh, we have trained it in that many species. It works on pretty much every bird in the United States, Canada, and Europe, and about 800 or so in the neotropics in India. And we want to include all 11,000 species in Sound ID. And the biggest barrier to doing that is to be able to train Merlin to identify a species. We need a minimum of 150 sound recordings of that species. And to get that, we need eBirders to go out and record birds and submit those to us, or we need to go out and record it. So we do that in a couple different ways. So a lot of my coworkers who work in the hallway right here with me, they do a lot of traveling and they do a lot of sound recording workshops in other countries where they bring gear down to, especially most recently, we're working on a bunch of projects in the neotropics. They've been going to Peru and Colombia. They're going to Argentina next week. and are teaching sound recording workshops, bringing gear down, teaching sound recording methods, how to edit and upload the recordings and get them to us. And then once we have enough recordings from those regions, we can build Sound ID for those regions. So right now we have active projects in the Neotropics, India, Taiwan, and New Zealand, and hope to add as much of the world as possible soon. But
That's
soon being like,
pretty
that's like
impressive.
5 years.
Yeah. Did have another question that's actually very related to that one, and that is, can you give us a hint or tell us about any exciting things that are coming to the ADA, to the app, or to your database in the near future?
Yeah, so for eBird specifically, for eBird and Merlin for the apps, one thing that's exciting is we finally were able to hire a couple more app developers. So we had been Merlin was built by one person, and now we have two people working on it. So that's great. We've just doubled our power to build new features into Merlin, and same with eBird as well. So that's awesome. If any of you know any app engineers, any software engineers that like birds, please send them our way. We're always looking for more, especially database engineers right now. But eBird specifically, we are working on some more tools to support projects that other organizations are running, which is really exciting. So just really making it easier for other conservation organizations to really like collect and export data for a specific project that they have in mind that uses eBird data. So more to come on that in the next couple months. And then what else is happening with eBird? There's some app updates coming up. And every November, we put out more status and trends products like this one. So adding, I think, a couple hundred more species, we finally have enough data for to make these really beautiful abundance maps. So very excited about that.
Yeah, I know, for example, just an example of that, the Virginia Society of Ornithology and Virginia's Department of, Wildlife Resources used eBird to do a 5-year bird atlas and collected the data during that whole time period. And I remember an atlas that I participated in some years before that that used a whole different system that was really nice and very accurate, but considerably more clunky to use. So it was a nice improvement. You did get another interesting question. One of the listeners or watchers said, how do you go about getting a job with Cornell to do birding?
I love
Sounds
that.
like a pretty nice job for a birder.
Yeah, we really honestly, we're really honestly in need of more software engineers, database engineers. So if you have experience in those types of in that field, and also love birds, I honestly like email me. We have jobs posted on our website all the time, and there's also a spot on the website to just submit a resume if you think that you have skills that would be useful to eBird. Like we want to hear from you. So please just seriously just dump your resume in there. We would love to hear from you.
And we have one more question, and then we'll go ahead and, well, actually, two good questions. One was that's an incredible amount of data that you all are collecting. Is that an issue? Where do you store it?
Yeah, we that's a great question for our database engineers. We had been storing it on campus. There's a couple different spots on Cornell University's campus that we've been keeping some of it. And more recently, we actually transitioned to storing eBird data through Amazon Web Services. So in honestly a much more secure long-term plan for it. It's all been transferred that way. So I think technically it lives in like a warehouse in Iowa or something right now if we want to get really technical with it. But it is much more available and easier to access for people because it's stored in that way now. So that's also something we're excited about.
Great. And I'll treat this as the last question. And that is the person asked, you mentioned Florida. Are there any eBird events planned in Florida over the approaching winter in Florida that you are aware of?
See, I think we haven't decided yet. There's interest from the Bird Academy team upstairs in attending the Space Coast Wildlife Festival, maybe having a table there doing some walks. But otherwise, I don't believe we have any Florida specific events.
Okay, thank you. I would like to say I really enjoyed this. It was just fantastic. Thank you very much for doing it. I learned a great deal, and I hope it sounds from the comments that people have been making that a lot of people were not only very impressed with eBird, but thank you very much for doing it. Lorraine, did you have anything that you'd like to add before we say
It was
goodnight to Allie?
fantastic, really interesting. I can't wait to play around with the app. Thank you so much, Ali. And there was one last question. Can we just ask that about the blue heron population?
Yeah, the question was, why is it declining so much, especially in the Central Flyway? Um, I found that very shocking.
Yeah, and I'm not super familiar with the Mississippi Flyway or with great blue herons in particular. I just kind of picked it because it was a common familiar bird, and I was equally shocked too. That was horrifying. But like what you said, the biggest threat to wildlife really is habitat loss. So I would guess that it's a combination of habitat loss, climate change, a little bit of everything, that's affecting them there.
Okay. Well, again, thank you very much. As I said, everybody that's a lot of the people that have commented, what their comment very simply has been, you did a great job, and thank you so very, very much.
And we hope you'll be back, Ali.
Yes, definitely. We have lots more things that we could get you to tell us about Merlin and eBird. Thank you very much.
Yeah,
And
thank you
thank
all
you
so
for
much.
all the good work that you do.
No, we can't do it all without you. So thank you all for using eBird and Merlin and contributing your data.
Great.
Thank you to
Thank
our
you. And
audience. We appreciate your attendance. Thank you.
Great.
thank you.
Have a
And
wonderful
everybody
day.
have a good night. Bye.
Bye-bye. Ellie, how many people were on all together? I can't see it.
I believe we had at most 32 people watching at once.
I
Wonderful.
actually was watching the participants, and it said 35 at one point, and it stayed that way for a while.
That's
Um,
great.
it dropped a little bit, dropped down at 34 before the end, but stayed there for a while too. So went pretty well.
That's
Thank
great.
you both so much for doing this. Really great information.
Great. I'm going to stop.